if you're balancing stress and if you're balancing intensity distribution, you can't just raise intensity up a ton while also raising up volume because you're doubling down on stress. Usually what you need to do is you need to kind of reduce volume and increase intensity because you're going to get the same type and the same amount of stress.
There we go, buddy.
There we go. And we're back. What is
We're back.
Less than 48 hours later, but hey, we're right on time. We're back on schedule. It is May the 14th, 2020. Welcome aboard Crushing Iron Podcast, episode 373.
Yeah, it is.
May
14th, huh? Is it May Day? What is May Day? May 1?
I have no idea what May Day is. I feel like that's something you never want to hear. So I'm not really sure
I feel like screaming it right now, dude.
I know. It is like we're going down, but it's funny. Like we'll get rolling here in a minute for triathlon and fun life stuff. But I was this week is supposed to be, or was originally scheduled to be, like the Chattanooga 70.3 race. A ton of our listeners participate in that. We usually do it. It's a team race for us every year, and we're all kind of in a place where everything is changing. Nothing is consistent. Nothing is the same as it used to be. Well, let me tell you. It has been cool here all week. Last week there were lows in the 30s, yet the world still knows there should be a Chattanooga 70.3, and the forecast for Sunday is a high of 88. It was going to blast people like it does every year. Which I find it fascinating, to be honest with you, that every single year is a huge cold front, and then the weekend of the race, it's always like that, because the following week it's like lows in the 70s, or it's highs in the low 70s and like in the 50s. So hey, some things change and some things don't, and the temperature for Chattanooga 70.3, the woulda, shoulda, coulda been, that was this weekend, it's going to be a blistering 88 degrees. So hey, take some solace and calm in that, and just say, hey, you know what? It is what it is, but some things are supposed to be and some things aren't. Kind of like this podcast.
Yeah. Well, that makes me even sadder, dude. I kind of miss the heat.
Dude, I just miss the. I don't know. I'm getting kind of all nostalgic over here, but whatever. I'm a hardcore emotional train wreck sometimes. But hey,
let it out, man. Let it rip.
Yeah, I'm not gonna let it rip. I'm not really.
Tell me how much you miss having me down there for the heated Chattanooga 70.3s.
Listen, first off, I mean, I miss having you around anyway, so I'm excited for you to join me here in Chattanooga. But hey, before we talk about nothing and then get into a lot of serious somethings, we appreciate you tuning in. If it's your first time listening, sit back, relax, enjoy the ride. We cover all things triathlon. We cover all things life, how they intersect, how they can complement each other, sometimes take away from each other. We'll occasionally dive into deep training analytics and really kind of deep dive in the data and be very specific about training protocols or training philosophies. And then on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes we'll have race previews, we'll have race directors on, we'll even do race recaps. They're always very popular. And then for the most part, we just kind of have an open, honest discussion. We let the conversation kind of go where we don't force it. It just kind of happens organically, which is how we like it. We don't have any sponsor. We don't do ads. We don't have an agenda. The only purpose that we really try to get across for every podcast is to at least put out some information that you can absorb and digest and apply to your life in a positive way. And our kind of our motto for our team, and I guess for the majority of what we try to at least articulate on the podcast, is we really do want you as an athlete and as a person to live a happy, healthy life. And that's generally where our topics go to, both training and just kind of normal life stuff. That, this is a hobby. We do this for quote unquote fun, even though some of us take it more serious than others. It's supposed to be fun, and we don't get paid for it, and it should continue to provide you a happy and healthy life and something that's sustainable. So that's what we do. We'll do it again today. We generally start out with a very loose, open-ended conversation. If you haven't listened to Mondays, dive in, because we talked about swimming. And Mike, let me tell you about Mike. If you don't know Mike and it's first time listening, he is what he does to me is he's kind of like a fisherman. He'll kind of toss his reel in with a little bit of bait and think, you know what? I wonder what I can get him to talk about today. I want him to go deep dive into this. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to drop in a little swim worm and he's going to attack it. And then next thing you know, 45 minutes later, we don't know how we got here, but we got into some like deep conversation and talk about how we see ourselves and our own reality and what happened in our childhood. But that's what he does. He's fantastic at it. He's super knowledgeable as an athlete and a coach, but he does an awesome job, and we just like to chat. And we hope you will pull up a chair and enjoy today's conversation.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, man, because I liked how you described that. We're happy and healthy, or we try to be happy and healthy, because God knows it's a nice thing to have out there right now as an option.
It is a very nice thing to have as an option.
As far as listening to things, and we do, it is our definitely our goal to keep things positive, and we just keep looking for that, and I think that's a good thing, and I think people maybe probably uh, respect that and appreciate that right now because it's tough to find stuff like that to listen to. So I'm gonna throw it out. Why don't you keep things positive today, man?
You're gonna throw. I mean, I always keep thinking like I'm like some negative Nancy, man. Like
No, you are, you are, you are, you
for
are,
first time
and
listeners, like they're gonna have this immediate thought of like, this is also what this is why he's like everyone's favorite person to meet when we're out at races and stuff. It's like he'll paint this very sly ninja type, portrait of me that's like this very rigid and negative Nancy guy. They're like, I do not want to talk to that Robbie guy, but you know what I do want? I want a selfie with Mike, and their kids run up and they're like, Mike, buy me ice cream, autograph my crushing iron, bumper sticker. It's got Mike's face on it with a big thumbs up. Like that's kind of how he rolls. But no, we do. We always try to keep positive. Sometimes, to be honest, we dive pretty deep, and one of the we a lot of the comments we get are have nothing to do with like related to triathlon and like changing your whole training philosophy. It's things like I tell people to listen to your podcast that aren't even triathletes because I feel like it has great life advice. And the other stuff is like they say things that you really don't want to hear, but you need to hear. You didn't, but we try to do it in just like a loving and an open way because neither Mike and I are perfect. We don't know everything, but we've been through a lot. And a lot of athletes are just coming to the sport. I've been in this sport for 15 years. I've been coaching for 10. So I've seen it. I haven't seen it all, but I've seen most of it. I've been through most of it as a coach and with athletes, and I've also seen a lot of it. I've gone through my own ebbs and flows of before I got sober and how I saw life and how my relationship with triathlon was then, and then obviously now it's totally different. And so we've been there. We've made, hopefully we haven't made them all, but we've made a ton of mistakes,
oh
and
yeah,
that's really like the at the core of why we wanted to do a lot of this podcast was not just the connection and creating a community, but it was like everyone tries to put on this facade and this very rigid, portrait of themselves. That's perfection. I don't make many mistakes and life is great. But dude, we mess up. We still mess up all the time, and we have made giant mistakes in both of our in our personal lives and our professional lives, and obviously in triathlon. And so if we can do anything to kind of help you avoid any of those pitfalls or help you navigate through them when you're going through them right now, or even better, see them as an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to bounce back in that no matter what you're going through personally and no matter how, where you think you are in your athletic life cycle, that you can't get fast enough, you can't get strong enough, you can't do this distance, that there's always a way, there's always a reason why you are where you are. And if you put your head down, you put your nose to the stone and you work hard, then there's truly nothing you can't achieve. And so that is, hey, talk about not being negative. Woohoo! Let's do it, baby. I'm like the Oprah Winfrey today.
yeah. You're good, man.
Did you want to deep dive back into what we promised we would go into today, which was progression
Yeah, we probably should.
and blocks? I mean, we sometimes say we're going to go into something on the next one, then we just totally forget. I will say it's timely, and I talked about this a little bit on Monday's podcast, but it's very timely for me personally. And one of the things that we talked about, we alluded to on Monday's podcast before we went on another giant kind of tangent, was the purpose of what I call progression and specific training blocks or cycles or phases, however you want to phrase it and word it. They're generally the same, but how people see them are very different. Like you might see, like it's very common to see people right now who have no race in the near future, they're basically cycling through a training plan that has a base phase and a build phase. Well, what those generally mean to specific athletes or on a training plan is because it is generic and it is general. It's made for a wide variety of people, so it lacks the ability to be specific. Is that those phases, for the most part, the way that you define them, the way that you see them, and how you relate to them from a training standpoint is it's really just based on duration and a little bit of intensity. Most of it is base from people who hear base phases, and when that's not what I'm referring to when I talk about specific blocks, or you can either go like you can use the fancy words like microcycle and mesocycle and microcycle, and but what the generally the thing people think of when they hear base phase and build phase are these are my purpose blocks. I'm gonna cycle through these right now because I have nothing to do. I'm gonna do base phase, which is just aerobic work. It's not really long, but it's long and slow. And then build phase, I'm gonna add in a little bit of intensity. Well, specific training blocks or specific running blocks, cycling blocks, swimming blocks are to address a specific part and a specific aspect of your performance within a singular discipline. So it's not just doing a increasing overall volume of your training weeks in a build phase to build your weekly volume to make sure that you're prepared for race day. It's addressing a specific weakness or even maybe maximizing a strength within the three individual sports. So for swimming, that might, if you're doing a swim like muscular endurance block, that might be something where you're doing a whole lot of pull work, a whole lot of paddle work, you're doing very long yardage, you're doing a lot of repetitions and sets that are 200s, 300s, 400s, up to 800s. Same thing would go for cycling. You could be doing something like a anaerobic or a critical power block, which is not just high intensity, because again, intensity is something that is relative to the effort you're asking somebody to do. You can, some people consider high intensity 80%, some people consider high intensity 120%. So what you could do for something like anaerobic capacity or critical power is you're not just looking at intensity, but you're looking at the amount of power you can put out in a very short period of time. Like we're talking 5 seconds, 30 seconds to a minute or 2 minutes. Something very, very specific that you're trying to elicit a response and a stimulus within cycling, and then move somewhere to running. It's not just like running volume. I'm in a big run block. Some people think, oh, that's just me doing a lot of running. It's also how you're distributing the running, and then the focus of what you're trying to accomplish within that block. Are you trying to get more frequency in? Are you trying to become more durable? Which those usually come hand in hand. Are you trying to increase speed? And are you trying to increase strength? Or are you trying to make longer intensity, like tempo style intervals, very, very long? But then the other question is, and I went through this fairly deeply, I think, yesterday in our weekly athlete Zoom call, was the most difficult part of that is how you mesh them together, right? Because
Yeah,
like I use I, I used the analogy yesterday, not the analogy. I used, I guess, the visual, the visual part yesterday was basically like if you take your two hands, your fingers spread apart, and you can kind of lock them together, right? And so that's how it should work. So if you take like a running block and a cycling block, they need to mesh together perfectly. Like you see your fingers go in and you're kind of clasping your hands together. That's how it should go. They should complement each other. But what oftentimes happens is athletes will take their cycling block in their right hand, take their running block in their right hand, they'll close them up, make two fists, and then basically bang them together, and they're going nowhere. They're butting heads because their running block is too hard. They're doing speed work, speed work, speed work, baby. And then on their cycling block, what are they doing as well? They're doing threshold work, threshold work, threshold works. But so what you're really doing is you're not improving a lot because you're not able to. Because in order to do the sessions at the effort and the intensity that you want to do to elicit the response that you're looking for, and for your body to adapt the way you want it to adapt, it has to have the legs. It has to have the cardio behind it. It has to be somewhat fresh to do it. So if you beat one section or one discipline up, like you're cycling, by doing 4 to 5 sessions a week, and there's three, four of them are super, super hard, and you try to run well too, you're not going to have it. You're going to be putting out a whole lot of effort to not get any kind of, you're getting very, very poor return on investment. So one of the hardest things for athletes to do is mesh those together. Let me rewind for a second. The
Okay.
reason I say is, and you could probably title this podcast, the reason you're not progressing is because you're not progressing, is that a lot of us right now have been, dealt some kind of a race day blow. You've had a race canceled. And many athletes, many, many, many triathletes, and I think just many athletes in general, find themselves in a situation where your Olympic distances or the races that you usually use as stepping stones to your big day have now been removed. That's a very, I think, interesting part of this environment that we find ourselves in, is that how athletes look at a season, they generally don't look at it as this is just where I am in my athlete life cycle of being prepared. Where do these things fall and how does this affect the overall goals I have, not just for this year, because so many athletes look at years just within, the weeks that we have, the months that we have. We put it on a time frame and we have to get it all done this year, because you know what, we basically start over. It's all linear. And so what happens is early season races, sprints, Olympics, 70.3s, guess what? They're gone. So now
They're
you're
gone.
thinking, well, I do have a late season Ironman, but I actually haven't ever done a 70.3. And I was aiming to do like one or two of those this year to kind of wet my beak a little bit and kind of get my feet wet and get prepared and pace things. So now what am I supposed to do? And I do think it's appropriate for some athletes, for some, not all, but some, to just progress towards hopefully doing the Ironman or whatever longer distance race they're jumping to later in the year. But I also think it's very, very important to recognize that most athletes get into the sport, I would say well over 50%, get into the sport and probably complete their first Ironman. I don't know, too soon is not the right phrase, but what I mean, well, when I say too soon, I mean what they're usually doing is they're jumping into this sport and they're saying, I need to do an Ironman the very first year. Like I need to get my Ironman, letter jacket this year so I can flaunt around town with it and wear it for the rest of my life. And then basically what happens is you now become addicted to that distance because it is the max. It is the max distance you can do. And if you don't do one every year, then well, I'm gonna give up my Ironman class ring. I'm not gonna wear it anymore. And so, but what happens is you basically stunt your development because you're always putting a ton of hours in. Most athletes do it the wrong way by going so slow all the time and not adding intensity and not going through specific progressions. So when I say in the beginning that this is very personal to me, it's because the last few weeks, or months, as I've kind of transitioned from the demands and the hours and the volume that I was so used to for the past 10 years with triathlon, I've kind of shed some of that to focus on family, to focus on work. Is I picked up trail running, and I had originally had a 17 or 20 miler I was scheduled to do this last December. I was signed up for a 15 miler that was going to be at the end of March, and then I was going to progress and do the Leadville 100 run, which is the end of August. Now, is that a perfect progression? No, because I probably could have used definitely 4 to 6 more months to lead up to have a really, really good race. So yes, because I feel like I could have completed it and at least put a good faith effort into it and felt well prepared. Yes, but I did the 17 miler in December, and then my 15 miler was canceled in March, and then yesterday I got news that the Leadville itself was canceled. And so basically, I think every athlete does this, and I think it's just human nature. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. My first thought was, ugh, even Allie was like, all right, well, you got to find another 100 miler to do. Like, like that has to be done. Like just because you registered for one and you committed to it made it the right decision. And while I was excited about it, I thought that through. And then a couple minutes passed and I actually thought to myself, no, you know what? I think this is actually okay, because it does. Is it a bummer? Sure, it's totally a bummer. I was excited about it. I planned a ton, had my pacers, had my crew ready, like I had everything kind of set in stone. I just had like I was entering one of my last big training blocks, and I was excited about it. So yeah, it was a bummer and it was a letdown. But my next thought was like, all right, how can I become a even better athlete for the time or for the opportunity that I am going to have in 2021. So now I'm going to have, 15 months to prepare so I can perform even better than I wanted to. So what does that mean for me as an athlete? Does it mean I need to continue to try to really put in mileage and not focus as much on speed right now and then just do the 100 miler? Or if I really, really want to do well, this really, really hard race next year, which I think is hard for people to wrap their brain around, what do I need to look in the mirror and say to myself? Well, if I'm being honest and I'm being objective, I need to get faster and I need to get stronger. So what does that mean? If you're balancing stress, if you're balancing intensity distribution, you can't, we've talked about this before. You can't just raise intensity up a ton while also raising up volume because you're doubling down on stress. Usually, what you need to do is you need to kind of reduce volume and increase intensity because you're going to get the same type and the same amount of stress. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, what do I really need to do? I need to basically take a step back in the direction I was going and kind of set myself back in a gradual progression, which means I need to go back to getting faster and stronger and cut back on, total weekly volume. I need to focus on that and probably do a 50 miler in, December, November, January, and then focus again on building back up again. So it was an honest conversation I had to have, and it was funny because Allie, when I told Allie that, she was like, "Excuse me, what do you mean?" And I was like, "No, I just think that I think this is the best thing for me, because I don't want to just show up and do okay. I want to show up and do well." And while I feel like I could have done okay this year, I feel like I can do really, really well next year. Like I've been given that gift of, that gift of hindsight that we rarely ever get, where you can actually put it into action and think, okay, well, I can do it next year. So, oh, dude, let's just fall back and get back into the groove and actually do a much longer gradual progression that allows me to put in more specific training blocks that'll make me a stronger, faster, fitter runner for the next time I build long. And so that was just a decision that I made. And I think that's a hard decision because you get super excited about racing and you get super excited about the longer ones and the hard ones, and you think, oh, I've got to do this, but I've got to do it. And if I don't, I'm afraid I'm gonna use the motivation. But I think there's a lot of clarity you can find in doing that. And that's when I say you're not progressing because you're not progressing, it's because a lot of athletes like find that they basically will ramp up in volume, they won't get a lot faster, then they'll dip down, they'll do it all over again, and they're just basically practicing staying the same speed for periods of time, and then they take time off and they get right back at it. And that's why you don't see much progression. I have advocated it before. I advocate it to specific athletes and say, I actually think it's in your best interest to not do an Ironman this year. I think it's actually best that you focus on getting faster. And then, if you want to do that, like it makes more sense. And so I think when you look at progression, you look at specific training blocks, most of you right now have been given that gift of hindsight to to not just piddle your way through more long and slow and doing everything that way, but it's to really look at your total athlete profile and say, first off, say, all right, what what do I have time to do? Because the reason that companies like Ironman, any kind of like ultra event, whatever, they make a very huge chunk of change off people who overcommit. Because I'll if you don't know this, you should know it. I mean, I think it's fairly common knowledge, but races like Ironman, Ultra, they over register and overbook because if they logistically think they have 2,500, they can handle 2,500 people, then they'll probably sell 28 to 2,900 registrations because they know based on the data, based on the statistics of the previous years, because they do packet pickup, they know how many people actually start, they know the attrition rate before you give the DNS or the do not start rate. So they're going to say, all right, well, I can make an extra, 100 grand off the 300 something people who either get hurt or overcommit or whose life changes. So like triathletes and athletes are your first inclination is to overcommit, to overdo, to go too hard, to go too long. That's just kind of how a lot of athletes are wired. But right now you have this unique opportunity to step back and think, all right, well, yes, is it super exciting? And can I tell everybody about this training block I'm doing and the specific, sessions that I'm doing? I can, they won't really care. Or and not do these longer races and just take a kind of step back and defer them to next year. Yeah, I mean, I know I should, but man, like it's just more fun to do this. But it's also really fun to progress, and it's also really fun to go faster. And so I would take a very hard look at your cycling, not just am I fast or am I slow? That's like two huge things that people like. It's not that easy to say I'm a fast cyclist, I'm a slow cyclist, or I just need to train harder and train more and I'll get faster. It's not just about that. It's about why you aren't performing well in cycling and how you can perform better? What's holding you back? Is it your ability to go anaerobic for a long period of time? Is it your muscular endurance, which that's what most people is they break down, they can't hold form for a long period of time. So they end up, their heart rate stays the same, but they slow down because they can't hold form. So they have very little muscular endurance. Same thing for running. Is like, does my run fail me, or do I fail my run by poor pacing on the bike, or do I fail it by not preparing enough? Do I not have the appropriate run volume? Like, look at yourself very, very critically and think, you haven't been given a year, you're missing opportunities, and I get that, but what you're also getting is you never, and opportunities are never fully, in my opinion, they're never fully robbed from you. They're just different opportunities now that present themselves. You might have been staring at one opportunity that was this race in August that's now been canceled, and you think, oh, well, now the curtain's pulled down on it. Now I've got no opportunities. Well, no, more than likely, two curtains pulled up next to it, and now you've got these two different opportunities. One's going to be, do I chase this same distance and keep doing it and keep, pounding my head against the wall and just keep going because I'm going to do it because I'm stubborn. I will do this. Look at me. Or do you have this other opportunity on this other curtain that pops up and think, hey, let's relook at how you're developing, and can you be a better, fitter, faster version of yourself if we do it this way for the next time you do get to the start line? And I think it's a great thing for every athlete to do right now. And here in a minute, after I shut up for a second, I'll talk to you about ways we can do that.
Oh,
Are you awake? Are you there?
Ooh, man, there's just so many variables. As you're talking, I totally get it because of the situation that we kind of find ourselves in, and you're talking about, hey, I'm just gonna refocus and look ahead 15 months from now. I just think that's super hard for people to do in general. And I'm always talking about myself. So I just, as you're saying it, I was kind of going, okay, how, like, as you look at maybe a traditional 20-week Ironman plan or something for somebody who comes in fairly decent shape, just so I kind of understand it, and maybe some other people understand the baselines of what you're saying, is like when you design a 20-week plan for somebody, I assume when you put these blocks in, they're just going to be different for everybody, right? I mean, obviously that's an obvious statement. I know that, but are you thinking about blocks totally different right now is what I'm getting at versus like if it was a regular season?
Man, that is a tough one. It's a really good question, though. I think, as a coach, you have to balance the line between reality and what's in the best interest for the athlete. And so, so most of us, if whether you're creating your own training plan, like I don't drop in 20 plans for anybody. But what I do have is I kind of sketch out an outline of gradual progressions leading up to specific race distances and race days. And I already know like what kind of specifics we usually need to go into for these specific training blocks, whether it's race prep phase or a build phase. If it's a flat bike course or hilly bike course, is it a flat run course? Is it a hilly run course? Or is it hot? Is it cold? Those are all different protocols you take for specific races because they create different demands. So you can't just start that at the end. You have to start that at the beginning. And so right now, as a coach, what you're doing, or at least I'm doing, is you're balancing the needs and the wants, which is athletes are like, well, my race hasn't been canceled, and you have to read kind of the personality of the athlete. Like, are they okay? Because some athletes are okay just training year round. They're okay, and they've already kind of come to that kind of peace of mind as, you know what, I'm okay if no races happen this year. I'm just enjoying getting better. Well, if you've got that kind of emotional, mental green light from an athlete, then for me, my number one priority is, well, then what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to basically take block to block and see what's going to get you better and make you the best well-rounded athlete we can be, because it's all about where you start. Like everyone thinks that you have to take like 3 to 4 months off and do basically nothing and then you start back over again. Like, you definitely need to, every year you need to take volume down and intensity down, but you need to keep doing something, because where the the higher your baseline, the better opportunity you have to reach a much higher summit every year. And what happens is most athletes, going back to like the reason you aren't progressing because you aren't progressing, is that like you progress and then you let it fall so deeply that the next you only have a certain amount of time and your body can only handle a certain amount of stress to progress the same amount it did the previous year. And then you have to add in life and stress and age into the fact, and eventually at some point you're just going to deteriorate yourself into never getting better and only getting slower. And so for athletes that have kind of accepted where they are right now or have come to terms with that, then you can kind of freely dictate what I think they really need to be doing right now to just become a better overall well-rounded athlete. Now, other athletes who are thinking, "Oh, you know what? I've got this race, my first one. I got to stay in the zone." And you kind of know as a coach, like if you if you just kind of say, "You know what? I don't think this race is going to happen," then you might burst a bubble, and it might be very, very hard to fill it. And so, and to kind of keep on that trajectory. So with them, you really have to kind of walk that high wire of we need to be prepared because the race definitely could happen because I fully believe races are going to happen, and it's just going to be very dependent on the type of race, the size of the race, and where the race is. But so what you don't want to do is have all this time being provided to you and then think, well, and then you think a race isn't going to happen and then it is going to happen and then you're not prepared because then you miss an opportunity. And so it's a very interesting time, as a coach with how you're developing athlete, with how you're not developing, with how you're moving athletes up in volume. Right now, I've never had more freedom, which is a piece that I love. I've never had this extended period of time from like, end of last year through now, which is like we're almost halfway through the year. And
God.
I know, right? I mean, God, like, thank goodness, like, can't let's negative split this baby. It's like you've never had this much time to specifically work on very, very fine details of what athletes need to work on. Because what happens is you can't always work on a specific weakness or a specific area within each discipline, like cycling, year round, or even in the course of a year with your training prep. That's because you can't, is when you talk about allocating stress, stress isn't just like like I was saying before, you can't just up stress and you can't just up volume and expect it to be okay because you're doubling down on stress. So in order to elicit the responses you need, you have to kind of move away sometimes from, all right, we've got kind of as good or as strong or as fast as I think we're going to be able to get given where we are. But now we're X amount of weeks out from a specific race. Now it's time to start, and that's what your build phase and your race specific phases usually do. And you can usually see that is that, so a lot of times volume actually decreases but the intensity increases, and the amount of intensity minutes increase, because what happens is you're actually, again, going back on, you're lowering volume but you're upping intensity. You're doing your best to mimic and get a better adaptation and response to very, very long intervals. So in like a base or a build phase, you might be focusing on like 30 seconds up to like 8 minutes, 12-minute intervals, whether it's cycling, running, swimming, whatever, hundreds, 50s. But as you go into like a build phase and a race specific phase, now what you're asking is, now you're looking at going like 20-minute intervals in cycling, like 3 20-minute intervals, 4 20-minute intervals, 2 30-minute intervals that are at or above race pace. So you're creating a tremendous amount of stress, but instead of a 4 hour like long endurance ride, or a muscular endurance ride, you're backing it down to 3 hours, but it's a hard 3 hours. So you're getting the same stress, it's just a different specific intensity you're looking for. Same thing goes for running. Same thing goes for swimming. It might, you might be doing 25s, 50s, hundreds all day, every day, fast, fast, fast. Then as you're, and with lots of rest, then you might build it up to, all right, now we're going to cut down rest, but we're going to elongate the intervals in the yardage you're doing. So it might now be 2 to 400s with a little more rest, or a little less flesh. And then now race specific phase, now we might doing lots of 400s, 500s, 600s, with either lots of rest depending on the intensity or very little rest depending on the intensity of the actual interval. And so that's the things that you have to do to prepare for race day. Right now, you don't have to do that with a lot of athletes, but you can just stick with the block that they're in. And one of the things I touched on yesterday was that one of the most difficult aspects for coaches to do, I think, and I think for like for athletes to wrap their brain around, is that different workouts don't mean your coach knows everything. It just means that they're creative. And a lot of times that's actually a very bad thing. There's definitely room where you need to be creative and you just need to make shit up, but to see if it works. But a lot of times, one of the hardest things to do, and I sometimes I have to have this conversation with athletes who reach out about coaching. They're like, yeah, I just I want to ask them if they're being coached, and I'm like, well, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Because those things are important. A lot of people will say, well, I just don't feel like he's very creative. Like I get the same workouts like over and over and over again. And so my first response is, okay, well, if you're looking for variety and you're looking for, a ton of different workouts, then I'm not your guy. Because, variety and creativity doesn't mean you're a great coach. It usually just means that you're random. And randomness is not what your body needs to adapt. What it needs is things it can execute on very, very well for extended periods of time, and then you just set it and you forget it until you look up and you see a training, you see a run, you see a swim, you see a ride, and if they start to kind of flatline or kind of like plateau, well, now your body's saying, oh, you know what, let's change it up, baby. I need to see that what we're doing right now isn't working. Let's change it up. Let's move on to the next block and the next phase, and we'll take the lessons we learned from this one, we'll apply it to the next one, and let's see what we can do. But
Hey,
one of the hard, yeah, are you there?
yeah, I'm sorry. I just before we get off that, I wanted to ask a specific question that because I know you've got the answer to it with the
Oh God, sure. Thanks, appreciate it.
with the psychology behind that because going through that with athletes because what I've noticed is when you have a workout that hits like the same type of workout that hits on the same days week after week sometimes that we build how like I've noticed some athletes are like man I don't know and but then they start to like it so
Mm-hmm.
how have you learned anything through that process from talking to people as because I'm the same way I love going out and repeating things and seeing like progression in there. And I think that's the solutions or the answer somewhere in there is that once people can kind of see and compare and say, hey, oh, I'm getting a new challenge out of looking at this thing and doing the same thing over and over and seeing how that's affecting me.
That's a really great question. And there's I think it's not an easy one to answer, but let me explain it a few ways or a few details behind that. Is one is and I think this was last week, one of last week's podcasts was about creating habits and creating patterns and establishing behaviors. In order to do that, you have to have something that's predictable. Not just, and this is again, I think been one of the hardest parts of this whole transition for athletes is that for most of you, you've had to remove a swim, and you're so used to. I mean, I know I'm so used to doing like we do, unless they have like a day of the week they can't swim or can't ride, or the worst goes crazy. A lot of people, it's like we know the days we swim, we pretty much know the days we run, and we pretty much know the days we ride. Like that is familiar, and athletes crave familiar. They crave routine. Now, are some athletes super ADD and just have to have variety because they have a very short attention span? Yes. But a lot of athletes, like people thrive when they're familiar, when they're in a routine because it sets you up for success. You know what to expect, you know how to, and you're falling into a pattern. So when you get them into that, you want to keep it that way, right? Because you want to change it if you're not doing the same workouts, you're doing intensity and duration very differently, but they kind of know generally what to expect in terms of like how the overall week is laid out. But then if you give athletes like the same, like I do this a lot, I give athletes the same session week in and week out for a period of time. I do it for a few reasons. One is if you give an athlete, and this like training plans are like famous for this. They give like just a bunch of random workouts that you do. It might pique your interest, but what it rarely, if ever, does is allows you to complete a workout to the best of your ability because it's new. The pacing is different, the intervals are different, the duration is different, the skill specifics are different. It's all different. So you have a hard time pacing, you have a hard time judging it. And then you're never really going to know how well it did or what or how well you did because you can't ever compare it ever again. You have to compare apples to apples. So if you're in most training plans deliver a fruit basket, you got got a banana, you got an apple, you got a pear, you got some strawberries. Like everything is different. You can't compare them. But what happens is, and when those athletes say that, I actually like, I'm looking forward to this workout, it's because they feel empowered and confident because they've done the workout, or they've done a workout very similar to it. They know how to pace it. They know what to expect. And athletes that know how to pace and know what to expect and have done it before and are well prepared are athletes who are going to execute the workout to the best of its ability, which is the intention of putting a workout in there. Putting workouts in isn't to create busy work. It's not to fulfill your need for creativity, or your need for difference and variety. It's about eliciting a response. You're never going to read a scientific study that was based on randomness. It's all about, you have two different sets of groups, placebo and then two other groups maybe, but they did every person did the exact same thing for a certain period of time. And then all of a sudden, like, you're not gonna ever read one that's like, well, we took 18 different people and we did 18 different protocols with all 18 people, and then we figured out nothing because it was totally random. Like, that's why it's so hard to, again, figure out what works and what doesn't, because you also have to have that level of patience. And I get this, and I tell athletes that I work with all the time, that I am super appreciative of and very grateful for the athletes that I work with, because the way that we do things, and the way that we do things isn't like some secret. A lot of people work with their athletes this way, is that you have to have a lot of trust. You have to be okay, even if you don't understand it, or even if we have a conversation, hopefully empowering you and educating you to understand it better, to just stick with it. Like the person I used yesterday on our Zoom call with Stephen Mass was that, we went through like, he's a very inquisitive. He likes to know things. He's a very smart athlete. He likes to be informed. So when I put him through this training block, he was very, I don't want to say he was skeptical about it, but he wanted a bunch of information. I challenged him to do his own research on it, and he was kind of like, well, what I've read is that, you have to do this for a certain period of time, and you have to accumulate a lot of hours, and then it's only really good for just cyclists. And I was like, I'm telling you, just please stick with it. I think we're on the right direction. I think we're headed on the right path. Let's keep doing this. And then he ended up testing and like blew us numbers like out of the water. And we achieved the goal that we meant to achieve, which was something that I probably should have recognized before that, which was a need for a higher cadence to generate more power for longer. And that's what we focused on. But it takes patience, and it takes trust to do that. And it's not just about, Brett. It's like, why am I seeing the same workout over and over again? It's because, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, you ride that train and you just keep rolling. And most athletes can't do that because they get bored and they think that they need things that are different. But there is a lot to be gained from routine, familiarity, and feeling prepared to do it. Like, I never have an athlete repeat a session and they get that second, third, or fourth session and they think, oh, coach, I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know what to do here. They're like, I see it again next week. I'm excited for it. Not because they're excited because it's necessarily going to feel good, right? But because they now feel like they've gone through like a trial run. They still did pretty well, and then, next time is the real show, and they get excited about it. It's you always get questions and kind of apprehension or confusion, or some, I don't want to say fear, but like sometimes, like, even like anxiety, like, this session, like, I don't know how this is going to go. And when you don't know how it's gonna when you don't know how anything is gonna go, how life is gonna go, what your day is gonna go, it creates some kind of level of additional stress, right? Because you don't know. It's the unknown. The unknown is what scares us. What's it feel we can't prepare for. But when we know what to expect, then we execute better, and we even go into it less stressed. And that is a huge piece of the puzzle that many athletes need to understand in preparing their own training plans, if that's what they're following.
Hmm. I think a lot of times, like with those workouts that repeat, the hard part is to because sometimes there's subtle things that get better. You know, maybe it's just being able to hold that third interval for longer, and or getting off the bike feeling a little stronger, fresher, or whatever. And a lot of times it doesn't necessarily clearly show in the numbers all the time, but if you just get it, that whole repetitive thing, and I always go back to my drumming, learning how to drum is like repetition is king. I mean, you can't really, I mean, you can't, you have to understand how to actually perform when it's the show, you know?
Hmm.
So there's what I see when you put out workouts and things like that is just these are mini snippets of races or whatever. And you have the opportunity to go over it, practice it, learn it in a in-depth sort of way that kind of will translate naturally once you get on the course. And that's the thing that it's always this weird thing about like people want to see like dramatic increases, you know, in their average speed or average pace or average power or whatever like that. But like sometimes like, and I'm sure you're good at I know you're good at this. You can look at a workout and it might almost be identical as the last week's, but you can see like what was really going on there and maybe how they actually got better over the course of a few weeks just doing the same workout. Those are the subtle things that you kind of try to point out to people all the time, whether it be that IF stuff or the whatever you get into.
Well, what if like the one of the things that again I think athletes need to understand, especially if they're self-coached or working off a training plan, is that you shouldn't see a noticeable improvement in every workout you ever do, because what that usually means is you're not training enough, or you're, well, I don't say training enough, you're training too little. You're not giving your body credit for what it's able to do because you're always training fresh. So like even like, and I'll even tell athletes this. I told an athlete this, um I think it was on Monday maybe. One of our athletes did, he has a really a kind of odd schedule. He did a workout. Let me see if I can just read it. He said it's my well, he said it's my humble opinion that this workout went about as well as I could have hoped. Legs were there pretty early. I felt fairly fresh. Went through a few things, and then he said, that said, I look forward to a slightly lighter few days to get some pop back in my legs. And I responded, I said, I'm super happy with this. I wasn't even looking for a monster session. I was looking to see how the legs are adapting, and this showed that they are there. And what I mean by that is I wasn't looking for some huge specific intensity or an intensity factor, training stress score, or an interval to hit. What I was looking for was he going to be able to complete another very hard workout, having just done 4 to 5 days of very, very, very difficult workouts with no rest. And so what I learned from that, and what I think athletes again need to kind of wrap their brain around, especially if they're coaching themselves, is that like you can't look to PR to PR every workout because you're looking for the wrong things. So what I was looking for, especially with long course athletes, is how is your body handling the load? Because load application and distribution is a coach's number one job, to give you the correct amount of load. You give an athlete too much load and they get overtrained and they fail to be able to perform, and they oftentimes get hurt or they oftentimes get sick and they need time off. If you give too little of a load, then the body isn't going to adapt the way that it should, and you're missing opportunities. So applying appropriate load is your number one job. And so what I was looking for, especially again, like I said before, for long course athletes, is that what you really want to see is how your body is adapting and responding to consistent levels of stress, because that is what you need in order to be able to perform very, very well over a course of a 70.3 or a full Ironman. It's about how your body handles load and how it's shedding fatigue, because those are the markers and the kind of the highlights you look for as a coach and how they're going to perform later on. It's
Mhm.
not because, I mean, even like if you go, I did this I think in our the very first run camp we ever did. I did a slideshow with Training Peaks and went over an athlete who did the exact same workout for 3 weeks in a row or 4 weeks in a row. It was a 4x8. I remember it was 4x8s, which are 4x8's best average. Which is a very, very, very hard cycling session. It's 4x8 minute intervals, your best average effort for all eight, and you only get a 2 minute rest in between. And so the first week it was like, and I'm just I remember what the differences were. I don't remember the exact watts, obviously, but it was like for this guy, it was probably like 220. So it's probably, let's say it was like 220 across the board for all four. And then the next week it was like 218, 217. And then back up the next week it was like 220 again. And then the very last week before we recovered, it was like, or right around there, it was like 220. I think it was actually a little bit higher. So some athletes will look at that and think, I just didn't get any better. Like I should be able to do better. I should see better watts. Like first of all, you're looking for drastic improvement over on a hard session in like 3 weeks. Like show some patience and understanding. But what if you take a step back and you quit looking through a microscope and you look at the forest, then what you're seeing is, well, those entire 4 weeks was under an increased level of fatigue. So his body actually was able to perform better after 28 straight days of working out. No days off, and not just like a couple of days of cycling. It was running volume that was also increasing, swimming that was also in there. So with no time off, his body was not only able to actually perform well under stress, it showed you that it was actually able to recover and shed that fatigue and continue to handle even more and more volume, because you might think that a couple watts of a difference 4 weeks in isn't that huge of a jump, and it's negligible even with the amount of fatigue you're shedding. What you're failing to see, or what a lot of athletes fail to see, is that the week before he did that first session of this block was a recovery week. So he hopped into his first session feeling fairly fresh, coming off a 6 or 7 day block of very, very little. So he performed to the best of his ability at that time under super fresh legs. Then you put an athlete through 21 to 28 day block of no days off and appropriate load, and they better that they're super fresh. They better their super fresh session by even a few watts, shows you that they're heading really, really well in the right direction. Those are just the kind of like small things you need to look at. Again, going back to how you're progressing and what do you want to progress in. Not just progression isn't always about duration. Progression is the nuance in between, and the intensity and the strength and the intervals, and the great debate that coaches have between, do you extend the interval, in duration, or do you cut down the rest, or do you, shorten the interval, and do you increase the intensity? Like those are like the fine-tuned things that you have to kind of go through with a comb. It's like, all right, do we turn 2 by 8 intervals with 4 minutes rest? Do we turn those into 2 by 8 minute intervals with 2 minute rest, or do we turn them into 3 by 6 minute intervals with 3 minutes rest? Like, and because what you'd like to do, and or even with running, is you like to look at the whole piece of the pie and you include rest. But it's all about the stress that you can get and what's working for that specific athlete. And if you find something that works, and to go way back, and I'll shut up in a second because we're running out of time, is when you asked about giving like repeated sessions, is that some people just naturally look at a workout and they get excited. Like I have some athletes who just crave big gear workouts. Like they see it and they love it. And they're like, "Oh, I can do this. I can annihilate this. I am strong. I can do this. Bam, let's do it." And and then they see other workouts and they kind of have this like fear and apprehension, and they never truly perform well at them because they can't wrap their brain around, they're still struggling with pacing, or they just have this adverse reason behind not feeling like they can do it very well. But so what you have to kind of balance between a coach is that if an athlete really loves to do this workout and they love to do it and they could do it all the time and they can do it all the time very, very well, then I would lean towards the approach of just let it ride. Because what you risk is, and again, like a lot of athletes need to change things up to get a specific stimulus and to improve as an athlete, but depending on where they are, like you want to force feed them the food that they like. You don't want to force feed them something that they hate. Because then what you might see is not just a physical rebellion, but emotional, mental rebellion. That's like, I can't do this. And now you've missed a couple of weeks of an opportunity just because you wanted to show them that they could do something different when maybe they can't. So it really is. It's like so much of I mean, to me, coaching is just as much, if not more, psychology as it is physiology. It's just it's a balance of both. It's about understanding the physiology needs of the athlete, but also understanding the psychology behind that athlete. And if you can't, and that's obviously something that training plans are incapable of doing. Even the ones let's say that they're very very good at giving you the exact workout, based on an algorithm or data. Well, they can't talk to you and they can't understand your specific psychology. And so like those are two very, very important pieces in terms of how you should progress. And that's why for a lot of people, and I know athletes like this that are super objective, that unless you're really, really objective, it's hard to train yourself that way because you can't be objective. Because it's hard. It's hard for us all to be objective when it comes to ourselves.
Mm. Well, yeah, I think you answered my question with the how do you know that? It's a lot of it. So much of it's about athlete feedback. If you get that fourth same workout in a row, and they kind of after a big block, and they kind of say, "Yeah, it went good. I felt pretty good," or whatever. That can be a win. It doesn't really show up as a numbers win per se, but if they feel good going through it. And secondly, I was thinking about like what you just said about force feeding the foods they like, and I think I just sort of do these things kind of like instinctually sometimes, but like if I'm
Hmm.
going through a training block for or a training plan for an Ironman in September, which I've done just about every year. And one of my things that I do not like is high cadence work on the bike. It's just one of those things that doesn't really jive with me. It's the food that I don't like. But I start, you know, I think once you get that basic shape down, you start turning the corner and you start like feeling good about, I love big gear work too. So that really resonated with me. But at some point I have to just start uh, teasing my body into that kind of high cadence stuff. And throughout my big gear work, even sometimes I'll just do, like you said, those micro bursts and things like that. I
Hmm.
know that's coming, and then it always happens towards the middle of the summer, towards the late summer. Then the high cadence stuff kind of becomes more enjoyable because I've been dabbling it in. I've been spicing it in all along, and I know it has to come. I know it's a good thing for me because it's one of my weaknesses. But the more well-rounded you can be, you talk about the I don't know if you've watched any of that Michael Jordan thing. I haven't, but I've been listening to the documentary, The Last Dance,
Hmm.
and he always, I mean, he was one of those guys, I guess, that would just force feed the foods he hated because
Yeah.
he always wanted to, if somebody pointed out a weakness, that was what he was going to make a strength. That's
Hmm.
just how he was wired. But a lot of us aren't wired that way. So
That's a
that's
different level. Like
well, of course,
he's Michael Jordan. Like you can't compare that.
I
But
know
but I
the
think I think what you can do, and this is something that I think a lot of coaches do very very well, is that you give an athlete a workout smoothie.
mm,
And what I mean by that is like, oh, you don't like vegetables? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in this smoothie, but I'm going to hide it behind chocolate and peanut butter and oats and whey protein powder. And so you're not going to know you're getting it, but you're getting it. And so that's something that you can do as a coach. Like you can work in, and sometimes athletes will even like comment this training piece like, oh, they're like, I see what you did there. Like you're being sneaky. Like you can get them if you really think an athlete needs to like veer towards a different direction or be more open to a different style that is very uncomfortable because like when you feel uncomfortable, you feel like you're on the defense. You feel vulnerable, and athletes don't like to feel that way. So you want them to feel empowered and educated that this is going to be benefit them, but you also want them to get the best out of the workout because athletes that are bought in, those are the athletes that perform well. Athletes who don't believe in their training, who are always questioning their coach or who don't understand their training plan, who think it's garbage and they're not bought in, they don't believe in it, you're going to get crappy results. You have to be bought in. And so once you get like and you work through that buy-in with the athlete and they trust you, like then you can say like I know you might not see this or you might not like it, but we need to at least experiment with it. Or you sprinkle it in. Like it's like, oh, you don't like this? Well, let me just sprinkle a little bit on top and see if you actually like it. Let me hide your, hide your dog's medication. You're not going to give it to them raw. You're going to hide it in their food. Like there's little things you can do like that. Same thing with like getting your toddler to try to eat things. It's like, you don't like this? Let me sneak this right in here and then see if you actually eat it. Oh, lo and behold, you like it. Like it's a lot of, again, that's none of that. The goal is the physiology. The goal at the end game is the physiology and what you know and what you want to figure out. Again, about the athlete, we always think we know about things about ourselves, but we really just are guessing or we're assuming. So in order to get to know those things, you don't start with the physiology. A lot of times you have to start with the psychology, which is how can I get them to go this way and do these things without being, you know, being on the defensive about doing them, and wrapping their brain around the trust and the process and sprinkling things in that are high cadence and low cadence and getting them to figure things out. Because a lot of times what you also find in there is that athletes can actually discover within a workout that, oh hey, I kind of did like that. Or, you know what? I think I'm actually good at this. And like those are little things that you have to figure out. But, the force feeding of the food thing is, I think, a good analogy, because that's what sometimes people even do to themselves. Like you talking about Michael Jordan, is sometimes people think, oh, I've got to get faster, I've got to run harder all the time, and they just run themselves into the ground. Like there's a way to get to every end game, but it's not always like the obvious starting point.
Mm, I like that. That's good stuff, man.
Whew.
Whew. Ah,
Yeah, stretch it out, man. Stretch it
stretching
out.
it out in the
I didn't
old.
put you to sleep today. Um, yeah, that was a good one. I had fun doing that one. It is like it's a great time if you're listening. You've had your season interrupted, or you're questioning your decisions on what you should do. Just remember, it's not about this year. It's about creating the best version of yourself that you can possibly create for the long haul. And a lot of us have been given that opportunity of training hindsight, which is, it's time for me to address and work on the things that I need to. And instead of lamenting over the missed racing opportunities, embrace the new opportunities that you have to maybe take a step back in your progression. That's not just staying the same level of fitness, but going longer, and now look at, well, how fast can I go and how strong can I be over the short. And that's just a great way to look at it. So hope you've appreciated in some way and enjoyed today's podcast. If you haven't been, you can always visit our website, which is c26triathlon.com. It's got all things community, camps, and coaching, including our online hub, which is an awesome resource that Mike continuously puts out. That's got videos, blogs, short little interviews with athletes. It's just a really great place with tons of info. And right now, through the end of September, we have a pay what you want feature of $9, $29, and $49. You can pick one of those three, whatever fits your needs and ability right now. Please do whatever suits your life and your financial um, needs best, but do that. You can log in and you'll get that via the website. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns about anything and everything, you can email Mike, crushingiron@gmail.com, or if you have any questions about anything for me, c26coach@gmail.com.
Yep. And on the online hub, I'd just like to add one thing. If you enjoyed this particular podcast and want to know more about training blocks and see examples that you did in Training Peaks and things like that, I've posted a whole athlete Zoom conference in the hub right now. So it's like another hour's worth of stuff on this particular topic with good examples that can kind of give you a better idea of what coach is talking about. So
Yeah, it's a great. I love the Zoom recaps that athletes can see in the hub, because especially when you use things like Training Peaks, because as a coach, when I tell athletes, like when I start working with them, is it's one thing for me to see the numbers, and to see the data, but it's also great for me to hear from it. And so if you can hear from me and see it from me via Training Peaks, via this podcast, and then also via the Zoom chat. It's a very, I think, um, very easily digestible way to consume a sometimes very deep level of data and information that you need to kind of soak in, with the ability to stop and pause and take notes and rewind. So I think it's a great resource to have, and I hope that you all find it very beneficial.
mhm. All right, man.
That's it. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Thanks
All
for
right,
joining
enjoy.
us today. Keep your head up. Go work on some training blocks.
That's right. We'll see you on Monday.
All right, buddy. Have a good weekend.